The Dark Scrolls. Hey, welcome back. Get comfortable. Maybe turn down the lights. Maybe not. Because tonight we're going somewhere your body won't want to follow. 5 centuries ago, queens shimmered in portraits. Ivory faces, jeweled gowns, poise that could cut glass. But if you could step behind that painted surface for one heartbeat, the illusion would rot in your hands. Because those perfect women lived in filth so deep, the modern mind almost rejects it. And somehow they smiled through it. Queen Elizabeth I bathed once every 3 months, maybe. And when she did, her ladies had to talk her into it, promising that water wouldn't kill her. Because in Tudor England, water wasn't cleansing, it was the enemy. It could open your pores, they said, and once the pores opened, death could walk right in. Evil air, plague vapors, bad humors, whatever name they used, the idea was the same. Bathing invited sickness to crawl under your skin. So the Virgin Queen, icon of empire, bragged that she washed once every 3 months whether she needed it or not. She wasn't joking. She was proud. It made her a woman of restraint, a creature of discipline. Her letters mention it. Ambassadors repeated it. To her, bathing too often was a kind of weakness. When she finally gave in to it, the act became a ceremony. Servants dragged buckets of water up stone staircases, heated them over the fires, poured them into a wooden tub lined with linen to keep splinters from her royal skin. The water was never hot, lukewarm at best, because heat opened those deadly pores even wider. Rose petals floated on the surface. Herbs burned in the corner to purify the air. And Elizabeth would step in wearing a thin linen shift, because nudity, even alone, was sinful. She soaked for maybe 20 minutes, her attendants waiting outside like silent ghosts, and then she rose, patted herself dry, dressed in new linen, and didn't do it again for another season. That was hygiene at its most civilized. Others did less. Some bathed only twice a year, before marriage and before childbirth. Some never. Catherine of Aragon arrived from Spain and nearly gagged at the smell of the English court. Letters home spoke of it. The sour air, the sweating bodies, the way the walls themselves seemed to breathe decay. But she adapted. Within years, she too had stopped bathing. Anne Boleyn, polished by French courts, kept up the illusion of freshness with rosewater, just wiping her face and hands. Nothing more. Imagine their daily reality. You wake in a linen chemise already stiff with dried sweat. Over it goes a kirtle, fitted tight. Then a gown of velvet or brocade, lined with silk. Separate sleeves pinned on. A stomacher laced so tight your ribs creak. A ruff to frame your neck and, if fashion demands it, a farthingale to hold your skirts wide. Dozens of pounds of fabric pressing heat against skin. You sweat. The sweat has nowhere to go. It collects under your arms, between your thighs, under your breasts. You itch constantly. The scalp oozes oil. Your hair turns heavy, slick, stinking of its own life. Your feet fester in tight leather shoes with no socks. Your thighs burn from friction. Bathing is forbidden, so you wipe. A dry cloth dabbed under the arms, a quick swipe between the legs, never thorough, never clean. Soap is for laundry, not skin. Doctors warn that soap removes the body's God-given oils, the ones that protect you from disease. So you keep your filth, day after day, week after week, building a second skin made of sweat, oil, and dead flesh. The smell becomes your shadow. Letters from courtiers whisper about it, the queen's chamber thick with perfume and human odor. To fight it, they drown themselves in scent. Rose water, lavender oil, musk scraped from deer glands, civet from a cat's anus, ambergris vomited by whales. The goal isn't to smell pleasant, it's to overwhelm the nose before the truth gets out. They know they stink, they just believe water would kill them faster. And so, the filth wins. Once a month, a darker enemy comes. A lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn wakes to find the familiar heaviness in her abdomen. The court prepares for a feast. Her body prepares for humiliation. There are no pads, no tampons, no medicine, no concept of hygiene beyond faith and linen. She folds strips of old fabric, ripped from ruined chemises or stained bedsheets, and tucks them between her legs. The cloth is rough and shifts with every step. Through the day she must stand, curtsy, dance, kneel, laugh. Each motion risks disaster. Warmth spreads down her thighs. The rags have moved. The blood leaks, soaks, cools against her skin. She can't leave. To excuse yourself from the king's presence is unthinkable. So she smiles, while blood pools in her shoes. By evening, the cloth is stiff and dark. There's no changing it. The act itself would be shameful. Later, she'll rinse it in cold water. No soap, no boiling. Then hang it to dry in a damp corner that never truly dries. The smell will sour. Bacteria will bloom. And next month she'll press it against herself again. Infections are constant companions. Rashes that never heal. Discharges that smell of iron and rot. Some women use moss or wool instead. Cheaper, scratchier, worse. Poorer women bleed directly into their clothing, walking carefully, praying no one notices. And hovering over all of it is shame. Menstruation is Eve's curse, a sign of woman's corruption. They whisper that menstrual blood can sour wine, kill crops, wilt flowers. A bleeding woman is dangerous, unclean, forbidden from church or kitchen. One Christmas feast, a lady of Catherine Howard faints mid-ceremony. Servants carry her away, leaving a trail of blood across the floor. The court pretends it's spilled wine. She is dismissed quietly, her reputation ruined, not for disobedience, but for having a womb that worked. The silence continues, month after month, generation after generation, and beneath the silence, infection. Open your mouth. Imagine the taste of rot. Anne of Cleves sits across from you at a banquet. When she smiles, her gums are black. Her teeth wobble. A sick, sweet smell leaks through the wine and roasted meat. It isn't her fault. It's fashion. Sugar has arrived in England, white gold imported from the Mediterranean at the cost of a servant's yearly wage per pound. Only the wealthy can afford it, so they gorge on it. They eat sugar in everything. Sweetmeats, candied fruits, marzipan castles, sugar plates you can eat after dinner. Elizabeth I is addicted. Ambassadors write home that her teeth are very black, the mark of England's new luxury. She's so self-conscious she stuffs cloth in her cheeks to hide the hollows where teeth used to be. By her 60s, she's nearly toothless. Dental care is a blood sport. If you ache, you visit the barber-surgeon, the man who cuts hair, lances boils, and saws bones. He ties a strap around your arm to make the vein rise, habit, even for a tooth, and then forces iron pliers into your mouth. The tools are filthy, used on half the town already. One twist, one yank, a scream, and maybe the tooth comes out whole. Maybe it shatters, leaving splinters to rot in your jaw. You go home and try remedies. Vinegar rinses that corrode enamel, sage leaves rubbed on gums, powders of crushed brick or bone that scrape away stains and teeth alike. When infection sets in, your face swells, pus seeps beneath the skin. Without antibiotics, it can spread to your blood or brain. People die of toothaches, and yet black teeth become a symbol of status. The poor who can't afford sugar keep their natural teeth. The rich destroy theirs as proof they can. Some even paint their teeth black to mimic the look of decay. So a Tudor smile is a graveyard. Rotting ivory, bleeding gums. Agony disguised as grace. Morning. A queen sits before her mirror. The ritual begins. Venetian ceruse, white lead carbonate, whipped into a paste with vinegar, the color of death itself, painted on with soft brushes from her hairline to her chest. Pale skin means nobility. Labor darkens, leisure whitens, so she covers every inch. The paste hardens like plaster, cracking when she smiles. Her ladies smooth the fissures with more lead. The mask thickens. At first it looks divine, porcelain, eternal. But the poison seeps. Lead enters the blood, drying and killing the skin beneath, thinning the hair, fogging the mind. To hide the damage, she applies more. Rouge is vermilion, mercury sulfide ground into dust. She pats it on her cheeks and lips, unaware that the same metal used to gild mirrors is now eating her nerves. Her hands tremble when she lifts the brush, but she calls it grace. A final touch. Belladonna drops in her eyes. Nightshade. The juice dilates the pupils, making them wide, dark, seductive, and blind. The world blurs. Light becomes pain. But beauty demands sacrifice. Eyebrows are plucked thin or burned away entirely. A high, bare forehead is the fashion. Some women smear lime and sulfur along the hairline to keep it smooth. The skin blisters, scars, then disappears beneath another coat of lead. She looks in the mirror and sees an angel. The people around her see perfection. Inside, her body is dying, one brushstroke at a time. This is the beauty that ruled an empire. They paint their faces with death, perfume their skin with the musk of animals, hide their decay. Under brocade and jewels, and still they smile. Because in this world, pain is refinement, filth is protection, and survival itself is an act of performance. The air of a Tudor court must have been thick enough to chew. Perfume and sweat and sickness and sweet rot. Yet somehow, amid that suffocating fog, they built cathedrals of politics, waged wars, signed treaties, birthed dynasties. They ruled through a haze of infection and fear, convinced that every breath of clean air might kill them, and every touch of water might invite the plague. And in that madness, they found order, In that filth, they found beauty. So when you look at their portraits, the white faces, the jeweled collars, the eyes that seem almost divine, remember the truth hiding under the paint. Skin cracked with lead, teeth black with sugar, bodies that hadn't felt clean water in months. Queens who bled in silence, smiled through fever, and lived inside prisons of fabric and superstition. That's the opening act of the Tudor body. The polished surface, already rotting underneath. And we've only begun to peel it back. You've seen the paint, the rot, the silk armor they wore against water. Now step deeper, because the next layer down isn't elegance. It's waste. The Tudor court could stage miracles of ceremony, but it couldn't handle what came out of its own body. There are no bathrooms here, no flushing, no privacy. When nature calls, you answer in velvet. Picture a feast at Greenwich Palace, 1530. Hundreds of people in one hall, candles dripping wax, air thick with meat smoke and perfume. The Queen's gown weighs 20 pounds. Her stomach cramps. There's no escaping. Leaving the room means everyone sees you go. Everyone knows where you're going. So she stays seated, smiling, waiting for her lady-in-waiting to catch the signal. A flick of the hand, a glance. Moments later, the servant returns carrying a chamber pot upholstered in crimson velvet and trimmed with gold. She slips behind the Queen's chair, lifts the skirts, holds the pot steady. Music plays, laughter ripples, plates clatter. And the Queen relieves herself into a padded bucket while the court toasts her health. That's not scandal. That's normal. Chamber pots were emptied by servants, sometimes into cesspits, sometimes straight out the window. "Gardez l'eau," they'd shout, "watch out for the water," before dumping it into the courtyard or the street below. Often they forgot to shout. Walking through Tudor London was a gamble. A window might open above you and rain down a stranger's waste. Streets ran thick with refuse, human and animal alike. Butchers threw entrails into gutters, dogs and pigs rooted in the filth. In summer, the heat turned everything into a slow-cooking soup of rot. Cesspits overflowed, seeping into groundwater, poisoning the wells. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, all had the same birthplace, under your feet. At Hampton Court, the royal garderobes emptied directly into the moat. That same moat bred eels. Those same eels were caught, cooked, and served at royal banquets. They were literally eating what they flushed. Even the king's throne was a toilet. Henry VIII's close stool, a velvet-covered box with a padded seat and a removable bowl, sat beside his bed. He had a groom of the stool, a nobleman whose job was to assist him with the act. It was considered an honor. That's the level of intimacy Tudor hierarchy demanded. To wipe a monarch was a privilege. Servants rinsed these pots with cold water, maybe a splash of vinegar. No soap, no scalding. The smell of ammonia never left. At night, chamber pots stayed under beds, their fumes rising into dreams. The royal bedrooms of the 16th century were temples of stench. Perfumed, yes, but still full of ghosts that refused to be drowned in rosewater. And yet, waste was the least personal thing crawling around those rooms, because the bodies themselves were infested. Every Tudor queen was a living ecosystem. Start with the scalp. They rarely washed their hair, maybe once a month, sometimes less. Oils built up, mixing with dust, dead skin, perfume. Perfect conditions for lice. Head lice were universal, not just common, universal. They laid eggs, hundreds of them, gluing them to the roots of hair. You could see them, glinting like pearls in the candlelight. Every day, ladies combed through their mistress's hair with fine-toothed ivory combs, crushing the bugs between their nails. Each pop made a tiny, wet sound, but they always came back. Some women rubbed mercury ointment into their scalps. It killed the lice and slowly poisoned them. Others shaved their heads entirely and wore wigs. Elizabeth I's iconic red wigs, the towering masterpieces of court fashion, began as camouflage for baldness and lice scars. But the wigs were made of human hair, sometimes bought from poor women, sometimes cut from corpses. They were never properly cleaned. The lice simply moved in again. So the queen itched, always. She just hid it under rubies. Fleas lived in the rushes, dried reeds and grasses scattered across the floors instead of carpets. They were meant to absorb spills and keep rooms warm. They also absorbed blood, vomit, urine, and dropped food. Nobody changed them often. Fresh rushes might go down once a year. Beneath them, an underworld of rot formed. Insects, bones, breadcrumbs, rat droppings. A carpet that crawled. At night, fleas leapt from the rushes to ankles, to calves, to thighs. They nested in bedding, in fur-trimmed cloaks, in the folds of gowns. Their bites burned, small red pinpricks that clustered on the skin like constellations. Scratching drew blood. Blood fed more fleas. To fight them, women wore flea furs, ribbons of mink or velvet draped around the neck. The theory was that fleas would prefer the fur to human flesh. It worked just enough to keep the lie alive. Then there were the bed bugs. They hid in the wooden joints of bed frames, in straw mattresses, in the seams of feather pillows. They came out when the candles died. They fed for 10 minutes, then retreated back into darkness, leaving trails of blood on the sheets. Their bites came in rows, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every night you could feel them crawling, hear the faint rustle of their bodies when you shifted on the bed. The itching drove people half mad. They burned the bed sometimes, the only cure. But you can't burn your bed every month when it takes 6 men to lift the frame. The court accepted it. They powdered themselves with starch to cover the welts, dabbed on perfume, smiled through the crawl of tiny legs under the skin. Scratch too much and the skin breaks. Without antibiotics, those scratches infect. Pus fills them, fever follows, and a woman might die from what started as an itch. You can't talk about it. Everyone is infested. Admitting it only makes you seem weaker. So they endure, smiling through invisible torment. And beneath the layers of jewels and velvet, their bodies were prisons of discomfort. Under all that magnificence, the queens wore nothing. A linen chemise, long and thin. That was it. No underwear, no stockings. The chemise wasn't to protect them from the world. It was to protect the gown from their bodies. The sweat, the oils, the blood, all meant for the linen. When it grew stiff, dark, and sour, they changed it. Maybe. Laundry was work. Water had to be hauled, boiled, beaten with ash soap. Many women owned only 2 chemises, one to wear, one to dry. So they wore each until the smell turned physical, until fabric crusted against the skin. Summer was worst. Imagine a packed hall, hundreds of bodies, no windows open, torches burning oxygen. The heat thick enough to taste. Under the gowns, sweat soaked the chemise, pooling under breasts, sliding down backs. collecting between thighs. Friction flayed the skin raw. Rashes bloomed under arms and along inner legs, red and oozing. And they bound their chests, not to lift, but to flatten. Large breasts were considered vulgar, indecent, so strips of fabric were wound tight around the torso, compressing the flesh until breathing itself hurt. The straps dug into skin, leaving bruises. At night, when they untied them, blood rushed back to the tissue in hot throbs of pain. The next morning they'd do it again. The body was the enemy. It leaked, sweated, smelled, bled. It betrayed the illusion of grace, so they punished it into silence. Even the clothes carried the enemy home. Velvet and brocade trapped everything: heat, dirt, insects. They couldn't be washed, only brushed or wiped with vinegar or, more often, with urine. Old urine turns to ammonia. It lifts stains. It also burns skin. So the royal gowns were cleaned in piss and worn again, heavy with history. And under those gowns, unseen but alive, everything festered. But there was one place where filth became fatal: the birthing chamber. October 1537. Jane Seymour lies in her bed at Hampton Court, her newborn son in the next room. The bells of London ring. England rejoices. She is pale, sweating, whispering thanks to God. She doesn't know she's already dying. Childbirth is confinement, literally. From the 9th month on, the Queen is sealed in her chamber. Windows shuttered, curtains drawn, no fresh air allowed. Bad air causes sickness, the physicians say, so they trap her in the same stale breath for weeks. Fires burn constantly to keep the air pure. The room turns into a furnace. She lies under blankets, soaked in sweat, surrounded by attendants who reek of their own exhaustion. The midwives are experienced, but not clean. They've delivered others that day. Their hands carry dirt, feces, the blood of previous births. They rinse them in cold water, wipe them on aprons, and touch her again. They reach inside to check dilation, to guide the baby. Each time they push infection a little deeper. The baby comes. He cries. The court celebrates. But the placenta doesn't follow. It clings inside her. The midwives reach again, pulling it out in pieces. Fragments remain. They will rot. The next day, Jane has a fever. They call it milk fever. They tell her it's normal, but the heat rises. Her belly swells, tender and hard. The smell changes, sweet, foul, unmistakable. The infection spreads from uterus to blood. Physicians arrive, robes sweeping the floor. They bleed her, because that's what you do for any illness. They drain a pint, then another. She grows weaker. They give her purgatives to make her vomit, believing it will expel the sickness. It only dehydrates her faster. 12 days later, she's delirious, skin yellowing, lips cracked. Her pulse races until it doesn't. She dies at 28. The Queen who gave England its male heir lasts less than 2 weeks after the birth. She isn't unlucky. She's typical. Catherine Parr dies the same way years later, 6 days after childbirth. So many women do that they start writing wills before labor, kissing their other children goodbye just in case. Childbed fever, puerperal sepsis, kills queens and servants alike. The cure is simple. Wash your hands, boil your tools, open the window. But no one knows yet. No one will for centuries. In those sealed rooms, the air grows heavy with the scent of iron and decay. And through it all, the newborn cries. A miracle wrapped in infection. The doctors leave. The priests arrive. They say prayers over the cooling body, light candles, sprinkle holy water on the sheets already stiff with blood. No one changes them. The chamber becomes a shrine and a tomb at once. Outside, bonfires still burn in celebration. England has its prince. The woman who gave him lies in a bed of fever and filth, a casualty of superstition. That was motherhood in a palace. Power and death, braided so tightly they became indistinguishable. Imagine the courage it took to walk back into that same cycle, month after month, knowing it could end the same way. Imagine surviving it and being told to be grateful. By morning, the court moves on. The bells ring again, not for her, but for the child who lived. Her body is wrapped in linen, carried out through corridors that still smell of her labor. The room will be cleaned with vinegar and herbs, fumigated with incense, and used again for the next queen. The cycle continues, and still the portraits hang. Still the stories call them radiant. Because history forgets the stink, the fever, the crawling things. It remembers the jewels, the gowns, the poise. But every brushstroke of pale paint hides a body that never stopped suffering. They lived surrounded by rot and somehow made it look divine. They turned agony into theater, disease into ceremony, death into routine. Because they had no choice, and when you look at them now, their still faces staring out from gilded frames, you're seeing the last trick they ever played, the art of appearing immortal while dying inch by inch. You've seen how they lived. Now let's see what they put inside themselves. The feasts look divine, golden meat, silver goblets, a theater of plenty. But if you followed the food backward, through the corridors and down into the kitchens, it turned quickly into horror. There was no refrigeration. A deer killed on Monday might still be cooking on Thursday. Meat hung in cellars and cool rooms that were never truly cool. It sweated, it turned, it stank. But meat was wealth. Throwing it away was sin, so the cooks disguised rot with spice. Every Tudor recipe reads like a desperate act of perfume. Cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, exotic powders imported across oceans to bury the smell of decay. Venison that had soured was boiled in wine and vinegar, drowned in pepper, sealed beneath pastry. By the time it reached the Queen's table, it smelled festive, not fatal. And everyone was sick. They called it the flux, the sweats, the crampings of the belly. Today we'd call it food poisoning, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea that left people gasping on chamber pots. Most survived. Some didn't. Dehydration killed quietly, faster than disease. No one understood water could save you, because water itself was a threat. The Thames was an open sewer. Cesspits leaked into wells, and the wells fed the palace kitchens. So they drank ale, weak beer, all day, every day from dawn to midnight. Children drank it. Queens drank it. Even breakfast began with alcohol. Water was corruption. Ale was purity. The constant drinking gave them flushed faces, heavy bodies, aching joints. Gout was the badge of privilege. Swollen feet, red with pain. Doctors said it came from rich humors. They were half right. It came from gluttony. Sugar finished the job. Their teeth rotted, their blood thickened, their hearts labored under the weight of sweetness and fat. But luxury was virtue. If you could afford it, you consumed it, even if it consumed you back. When their bodies finally rebelled, when the stomach clenched or the head spun, They called for the physician. He came with a leather bag of horrors. Inside leeches, lancets, powders of ground bone, potions of mercury, and something labeled unicorn horn that was actually narwhal tusk. Medicine was theater. You didn't get healed, you got performed upon. If your pulse ran high, they bled you. Leather strap, sharp blade, a bowl to catch the proof. Blood was life, so naturally they believed you had to let some of it out. Too much made you feverish, too little made you weak. No one knew where the balance was, so they guessed. Sometimes they guessed you to death. Leeches were the gentler option. They'd place them on temples for headaches, behind ears for fevers, between thighs for menstrual cramps. Yes, on the vulva. The leeches bit, drank, dropped off. The wounds kept bleeding for hours because their saliva stopped clotting. Then the same leeches were rinsed in water and put back in the jar for the next patient. Disease moved silently from one royal body to another, carried by the doctor's cure. For skin ailments, they prescribed arsenic paste or mercury ointment. For coughs, powdered pearls or crushed coral. For melancholy, a tincture of gold leaf. For plague, a poultice of pigeon guts tied to the feet. If you felt weak, you were told to drink your own urine. Fresh was good. Aged was better. After days of sitting in a jar, it fermented, the ammonia rising like invisible smoke. They used it to wash wounds, bleach linens, even scrub the face for brightness. It worked just enough to keep the madness alive. When urine failed, they turned to bloodletting again. You could lose a pint, faint, wake pale as wax, and hear the physician whisper, "The sickness leaves you." It didn't. Only strength did. Every cure scarred the body. Every treatment poisoned it a little more. But faith in the system was absolute. To doubt the doctor was to doubt order itself. They sought health the same way they sought beauty, through suffering. Night in the royal chamber. The queen sits before her mirror, that same white mask drying on her face. But there's another ritual now. Beauty through pain. They believed the body could be sculpted like marble if only you punished it enough. There were depilatory pastes, quicklime mixed with vinegar, or even arsenic. Spread it on, wait for the burning to start, scrape it off with a dull knife. The hair and top layer of skin came away together, leaving the flesh red, weeping, pure. For wrinkles, masks soaked in egg white and alum were tied tight to the head overnight until the face throbbed. For youth, they rubbed animal fat, bear grease, goose fat, pig lard into the skin. It turned rancid within hours, but the scent of rot was already part of life. They slept in corsets stiff with whalebone, in gowns that never truly came off. Sweat pooled under the cloth, feeding rashes that never healed. They called it modesty. Their bodies called it torture. Even their hands bore witness. No manicure, no file, just knives. You trimmed your nails with the same blade you cut meat and thread. The edges tore, dirt gathered beneath. Infections bloomed around the cuticle. Toes fared worse, shoved into leather shoes that never fit, curling under the pressure until they grew thick and yellow. You couldn't show them. That was indecent. You just lived with the pain. And the smells, always the smells, of sweat, of metal, of meat gone wrong. They filled their halls with herbs, with burning juniper and rosemary, not to please, but to survive. The smoke bit the throat but kept the rot at bay. For a moment, every sense was under siege. They lived inside their own decay and called it grace. And when death came, and it always did, it came dirty. A queen could survive childbirth, plague, even the king's temper, but she could not survive time. The face of power would crack. The lead would eat deeper. The tremors would worsen. By 40, most were old. By 50, ancient. Few saw 60. When the end arrived, it arrived publicly. No embalming, no sealed coffin. The body was washed in cold water and rose water, wrapped in linen, and laid out for display. It began to change almost immediately. The skin turned gray, then green. Fluids leaked from the nose and mouth, staining the shroud. The air filled with that thick sweetness only the dying and the dead share. But death was ceremony. They covered the stench with incense and hymns, with lavender and thyme. The courtiers knelt and whispered prayers while pretending not to gag. For days, sometimes weeks, the corpse lay in state. Candles dripped wax onto the coffin, mixing with the slow seep of the body beneath. Flies gathered in corners of velvet. Maggots bloomed in silence. When they finally buried her, it was quick and heavy. A wooden box, a shallow grave, damp earth. The body would bloat, burst, collapse. The worms would come. Within months, she'd be unrecognizable. Within years, the grave might be opened again to make space for another. Even in death, there was no privacy. And yet, through all of it, they endured. That's the part no one paints, the endurance. To live in that filth and still rule, still scheme, still inspire awe. That's power of another kind. They built empires while half-poisoned, negotiated treaties while feverish, performed perfection while decaying underneath. They were survivors of ignorance, prisoners of ritual. And somehow, through rot and superstition, they made history. When you look at Elizabeth now, that immaculate mask of white and gold, remember, her skin was cracking, her teeth were gone, her breath smelled of metal and wine. The crown weighed on a skull already hollowed by lead. And still she ruled an empire of the sun. Still she terrified men. Still she became legend. Because the body could be filthy, the mind did not have to be. She weaponized illusion, turned decay into divinity. It wasn't beauty she sold. It was endurance dressed as beauty. The power to keep smiling while everything underneath screamed. That was the secret language of Tudor queens. Not grace, not purity. Defiance. They knew the world would remember only the surface, the jewels, the paint, the posture. They counted on it. They let history forget the smell. But if you listen closely to the silence between their portraits, you can still hear it. The rustle of lice under a wig, the slow drip of water into a chamber pot, the groan of a woman in the dark, trying not to die of something no one can see. 500 years later, we stand in hot showers. We wash our hands, we flush our toilets and think ourselves civilized. We sleep on clean sheets and call it ordinary. But to them, it would have been paradise. So tonight, when you turn off the light and lie down, remember this. Beneath every empire lies a layer of rot. Beneath every crown, a skull. The difference between their world and ours isn't that we're clean. It's that we know we should be. That's the miracle of history. The filth stays buried. The portraits stay beautiful. and the ghosts of those queens still whisper through the scent of your soap. Sleep well, and maybe, in the morning, take a shower, just because you can. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.